All right, I'm going to have a little bit of a rant today because I can't believe this conversation even needs to happen. But I guess we're going to have the conversation since it's come up on Twitter and it is all sparked from the Invincible versus game. There are actually people online that do not understand that modern controls are easier to use than classic controls. But before we get to all of that, let's talk about how this all started. Let's review that situation and try to understand why people are really annoyed at this Invincible versus game even though it's not out yet. Now, there has been a lot of information coming out about this game. There seems to be a lot of excitement around it, but this recent piece of information seems to have put a lot of doubt in people's minds. Maximilian did a great job in covering this game on his channel, and I really enjoyed watching a video of him breaking it down, and I feel like more fighting game developers should utilize people like Maximilian to really sell the game to people. But even Maximilian can't save this game from the amount of negative attention it is now getting because of one simple thing and one simple line that was sort of uttered or written in this article, and it read, "Special moves are their own button and Invincible versus does not use motion inputs." Now, I'm not going to go through all of the messages on the post because it has over 1.3 million views, but you can only imagine how the FGC responded when they saw this. That single line has completely turned what seemed to be a very, very positive reception of this game to a very negative one. Now, I'm not speaking for all people. I am not saying that you are wrong if you don't mind this. Do not feel like I am personally attacking you. This is just spoken from the perspective of somebody that has been playing fighting games for a very long time and doesn't really appreciate the simplification of some of the more legacy products that we have. Now, obviously, you're watching me play Bleach Rebirth of Souls in the background here, and this game has very simple controls. There's no directional or motion inputs, and that's fine for this kind of game, but you can bet your bottom dollar that if this game had directional inputs, it would 100% lose some of the players that are considered very strong now, because directional inputs or motion inputs have notoriously been difficult for people in fighting games. That is one of the reasons why these new anime games or these arena fighters or axis fighters don't have them, because they are a barrier of entry and a lot of people don't like them. Having said that, there are a lot of people that do like them, and it becomes an issue when you have more classic style games like the 3v3 or like Tekken or Street Fighter that start to incorporate very simple controls and there's no option to have the more classical range of motion. So firstly, let's go over what the purpose is for having a special button and no motions. What does it do? Who does it benefit? And why are people so annoyed about it? Because this seems to be something that is going over people's heads and they're trying to make out like there is no difference between classic and modern, which is an absolutely absurd thing to say. We're going to go over some screenshots in just a little bit. But to start with, having modern controls in there, and the reason that they were created was to bring in new players. Fighting games, as previously mentioned, are notoriously difficult to get into, and one of those things that made it very difficult for some people to get into them was execution. Now, I can tell you, as somebody that has played classic fighting games all his life and has played these games that have very difficult inputs, there were even some characters that I wouldn't touch. I remember seeing the inputs for like Guile or Vega on Street Fighter 4, and immediately I thought to myself, why in the hell would I even put myself through that? Now, luckily, I'm not a massive fan of either of those characters, and Bison is a relatively easy character to use. I know some people have issues with charging. I'm not one of them, but those two are just examples of classic controls that might have put people off. Now, I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think it's part of the character's charm. I don't think that you should take away from what the character is just to benefit a player like myself who might not want to do them. Part of the reason and part of the things that makes these characters special is overcoming some of their executional difficulties. Just making everything one button or very simple to do takes away from the game. Now, the purpose of doing that would be to get somebody like me to play them, and some people don't seem to understand that. You would be making the character easier. That is not passive aggressive to say. That is not condescending to say. That is the truth. If you don't like the truth, that's really nobody's problem, but that is why they are designed that way. If you are playing modern controls online on Street Fighter 6, for example, you are using a more simple version of the character. Now, the character might be weaker because they've taken away certain attributes, but the purpose of the modern controls is to make them more simple for you to play. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are benefiting yourself in the long run if you really want to get the most out of the character, but the purpose is so that you can play the character without any sort of barriers that would have kept you away in the first place. I'm repeating this so many times because this seems to be a very hard concept for people to grasp. One of the reasons why players don't like this, and one of the reasons why I am not a champion of it, and I would rather modern controls did not exist online or in ranked, is because you as the opponent are not doing the work necessary to overcome the difficulties of that particular character. You are essentially having your hand held because you can't be bothered to go into training mode and learn how to do these things. Now, yes, obviously I don't like those things. I think that the classic way of fighting games being played is the best way, where everybody has to learn hard stuff, and there's going to be certain characters that don't require you to have very, very frame perfect inputs or learn certain motions that are very, very difficult, but those characters come with other drawbacks. Now, I understand why they have them, and so I'm not against them being in the game. I'm just saying from a personal standpoint, I don't like them, and I would prefer if they weren't in the game, or at least not on ranked and certainly not in tournament. I know what people will say, yes, but they take away certain abilities from you. I understand that, I get that. But then I would ask you, what is the reason for why people are using modern? What is the intended purpose for modern controls? The intended purpose is to make it easier for you. That is why they are there. They don't serve any other purpose. I don't know why this is so controversial for people to listen to. And we're going to get to the screenshots in just a moment, because some of them, and again, I'm not going to put all of them on screen because there are so many idiotic comments on here, but some of them really did make me laugh. It's like you are being personally attacked because we're pointing out the obvious. It's like you watching Bleach Rebirth of Souls here. You could have easily designed this game to have motion inputs. Everything you're seeing me do here could have a motion attached to it. And you could have a modern section where those things are not a thing, where you're just watching it play out in the same fashion that you're seeing now. Of course, this version would be easier because you're pressing one button to do the majority of the attacks. Whereas if you're doing a motion, you have the opportunity to fail those things, to not be as consistent. That is one of the difficulties of fighting games. I don't know why people are arguing this. And this bleeds into other areas of fighting games. Fighting games have been criticized recently for being oversimplified. Now, if we're talking arena fighters and axis fighters, yes, they've always been pretty simple because of the audience they're aiming for. And to their credit, they do seem to get the audience that they're aiming for. These games seem to sell very, very well. Maybe not Bleach Rebirth of Souls, but the Ninja Storm games, the Sparking games, games of that nature have done very, very well in the sales department. But classic fighting games are always going to be very difficult to get into, because even though you give people these classic controls and these modern controls, they're still very, very, very difficult. And at the end of the day, the modern control doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to win, and that is not the point of this argument. The point of this argument is to point out why they were created, which seems to be something that people are muddling up. I'm going to read out to you a screenshot here which perfectly embodies everything that I'm saying in this video, and then follow it up. And it's from Scroll TV, and it says, this genre will remain smaller than most competitive video games because when you lose, you can only blame yourself, and people can't accept that. No amount of accessibility will fix that. A big part of it is ego. There's a reason we make fun of scrubs that make excuses, and it's because they're clearly deflecting to protect their shattered ego. This genre will teach you humility and self-improvement. Most randoms prefer living like NPCs. Now, everything he's saying there is 100% true. This genre will humble you. There is nobody else to fall back on, and no amount of accessibility is going to change that. I acknowledge the fact that a modern control gamer is not going to be able to beat me just because they were using modern controls. That's not what the argument is here. And I know that there's going to be people in the comment sections that don't listen. The argument here is that modern controls makes it easier for you. That is the only argument here. Whether you think it's a redundant argument, whether you think it's a waste of time, is besides the point. That is just the facts of the matter. No motion inputs, easier. Motion inputs, harder. It is not a hard concept for somebody to grasp. And then Femshep here responded to it and said, this right here is why I laugh when people say I play baby mode with modern controls. There is no control scheme in existence that would do the hard work of advancing to a high level of play for you and confronting your own ego. I have to do that daily. So why are you using the modern controls then? Yes, it's true that fighting games are very difficult to play, and somebody that's using modern controls on Street Fighter is not going to be able to beat me on it, for example, with my Bison, just because they're using modern. But the question still remains. Why are you using modern? What purpose do they serve? What purpose does modern controls serve on Street Fighter 6, and why are you using them? This response from Femshep is a complete deflection. If this was the case, then you wouldn't use modern at all. Again, I'm going to reiterate it one more time. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to beat a Daigo just because you're using modern, but there is a clear-cut reason for why you're using modern, otherwise you would just use classic. And if you say no, then I would say to you, okay, what was the point in putting modern controls in the game in the first place then? What do you think they're for? Perfect Legend here says modern controls is Ozempic for fighting game players. Don't want to do the work, just want the results. And that's all it is. It is the easiest route to the results. That's what they are. Why are people in denial here? Why is this even an argument? I want to show you this galaxy brain take from an individual called Duenta Hicks. And there were loads of arguments that were made from this individual, but I'm just going to show you one because we've kind of already covered most of them in the rant that I'm doing here. But he says, someone I'm sure drives an automatic. He said that in response to me. Why not use manual? Because why learn something that doesn't matter if the end result is the same? Like if they had no choice, they could motion control. It's not that hard. You guys swear you're doing something special. This guy kind of made the point for me. Why not use manual? That is the very reason why I use automatic. I got my license on manual like most people. But when I drove an automatic car, I quickly realized that the execution barrier wasn't there anymore. So if I wanted to go uphill and I got stuck in traffic, I don't have to fiddle around with the clutch and the gears anymore. I can just put my foot on the brake. The execution barrier is gone. Why is that a hard concept to understand? He literally made my point for me. If that wasn't there and I didn't have the execution barrier, maybe my car starts to roll down the hill. Maybe I cause an accident. Maybe my insurance goes up. With automatic, I remove that possibility because all I have to do is put my foot on the brake. So thank you for making my point for me. That is exactly why people use modern controls. They use modern controls to alleviate any potential mistakes that might come through execution. And then he says if they had no choice, they would just learn motion controls. Well, yeah, obviously, if you have no choice, then obviously you're going to learn those. But the very players that he's talking about, and he said this in following post, the very players that he's talking about that would just learn motion controls actually wouldn't even play the game because the game was too difficult with classic controls. That is why they created an accessible controller scheme. Whether the character gets stronger through that controller scheme or not is a completely different argument. The intended purpose was to hold your hand, and that is what they're doing. Automatic cars are much smoother to drive. You alleviate any potential issues of rolling downhill. You don't really ever run into the issue of stalling because the gearbox is automatic. It's doing the work for you, and that's the key point here, doing the heavy lifting for you. Femshep might want to say that she's not using a baby mode, but the facts of the matter is that classic and modern are not the same. One is easier than the other. She has stayed on modern for a reason. It is not to put anybody down. It is not to tell people that they are crap at fighting games or to act elitist or to stroke my own ego. It is literally to acknowledge what is in the game. Like I said, I love playing these anime games, but Bleach Rebirth of Souls, Ultimate Ninja Storm, Demon Slayer, and even the Sparking games are astronomically easier to play than games like Tekken or Virtua Fighter or Street Fighter because these games have serious execution barriers for the most part, and it leaves a lot of room for you to drop your combos and get opened up by your opponent, where in these games that risk isn't necessarily there. It's not there anywhere near as much as it is in the classic games, and that's all it is. Mighty Keith weighed in on this conversation, and there were some interesting comments in his comment section I wanted to read out to you guys to further prove the point that it's very important for people that play fighting games that these games don't get dulled down, and there's many good reasons as to why. So Mighty Keith tweeted out saying, how important do you feel motion inputs are in fighting games and why or why not? I personally have enjoyed fighting games with simple controls just as much as ones with motion controls, but I want to see what others think. Now, just before we go forward, I have also enjoyed fighting games with simple controls. You're looking at one on the screen right now, but I think there is a time and place for those sort of things. And of course, make no mistake, the game is simpler because of it. This Bleach game would be astronomically harder if it had motion inputs, obviously. That means that more people can enjoy this game without putting in the same level of effort because motion inputs are difficult. Someone said fighting without much execution breeds less execution and less feeling of satisfaction. Oh, but simple controls won't do that. When you lessen one aspect, the other aspects are going to be lessened as well. Mike Keith responds by saying, how would that explain games like Super Smash Bros, Melee or Ultimate then? The controls are very simple, but the games have been played competitively for a very long time and people love them. Vision Board responds saying because they have always been like that, plus they aren't traditional fighting games, they don't share many elements anyways besides a 2D plane and beating each other up. There's a difference between games that have had execution and lessening them later in the series. And to add on to that, Melee specifically is a very high execution game, but it's high execution for other reasons. I guarantee you if they simplified Melee's execution, that scene would not appreciate it whatsoever. And I think that is largely why a lot of the people that still play Melee didn't really move on to the other games. That's why Melee still has a thriving scene. Melee is, without a shadow of a doubt, the hardest Smash Bros. Game to play at a high level. And I'm fairly certain if you remove the execution from Melee, they wouldn't like it. Melee's execution comes from other things that Street Fighter doesn't necessarily have, nor Melee has. Heap says, I think removing motion inputs removes high execution barriers from certain characters and their uniqueness, which isn't good. This encourages developers to add in more system mechanics. This homogenizes fighting games where every character would play the same. This is less fun in my opinion. Mighty Keith responds by saying, you feel systems homogenize a fighting game, but motion controls don't? I'm confused what you mean. He then clarifies by saying in Street Fighter 6, which is a game I enjoy, there are fewer charged characters in order to make modern controls versions of them. This sucks because charged characters are fun to me. This also made a lot of the characters play similarly when you're looking for a drive rush combo to win. And this is very true. You don't have to look any further than C Viper, for example. This character was known for her execution barrier in Street Fighter 4. If you take that away, you take away a lot of the character's uniqueness. I'm actually wondering what's going to happen to her in Street Fighter 6, considering Street Fighter 6 is astronomically easier to play than Street Fighter 4. And of course that is a whole other argument. Fighting games have become easier across the board. This is just another layer that gamers don't want. There will be more layers later down the line. This is the one we are now talking about. Execution has already been an issue. It seems normal now, but they have been dumbing down games in fighting for a very, very, very long time. In my opinion, it's the learning curve on playing them. Fighting games are hard to get into, not because of the combos being hard, but because of the mandatory basics. It takes time to learn and some people don't want to invest. It's like playing instruments. That is very true. Again, these games are very difficult to play. I'm not saying that you can't use modern controls. I'm not even saying that you should be shamed for it. I'm just saying let's just call a spade a spade. Now, in terms of the Invincible game, yes, it's very possible the game could come out and we are all wrong. But the optics of it don't look good given the current situation that we are facing in fighting games. Especially when there's not an option for motion controls. You're alienating a whole kind of player base that like doing those things. Now, once again, Invincible is a new game, so I am willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. However, it doesn't look good based on the information that we already have and based on the games that Invincible is emulating. But we will have to wait and see. Now, this video could go on and on with the amount of screenshots that were being shown to me from people making these posts. And yes, the reason that people are outraged is because fighting games feel like they're being simplified. They feel like they're being simplified to a point where people don't have to learn as much and the magic behind them is being taken away. And Shroud put together an amazing clip talking about another game that is going through the exact same problem. So if you haven't seen that clip before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the clip for you guys now so that you get an understanding of what we are talking about here to close off the video, because some people do not understand why one of the oldest competitive genres is coming under a lot of fire from its player base for simplification. So I'll play the clip for you guys now.
This is the epitome of what happens every single time. You come in, whether you're a AAA dev or an indie or whatever, you try to come into an extraction game and you try to make it and you try to remove the friction. There's a lot of friction in a game like Tarkov. There's a lot of complexity and things that might not want you to open up the game ever. Hundreds of bullet types, thousands of individual items, quests that don't tell you at all where to go, no map. The weapon attachment system is like, what am I doing? Right? So much friction. There's so much friction to play Tarkov. Most people don't even open that game. But that friction is what makes the game so popular to its core audience.
And that translates perfectly to fighting games. And we can go over multiple things in fighting games, but we're just focusing on one button supers and motion inputs right now. And motion inputs and the way that we interact with these games does open up a lot of different avenues, and it does expose a lot of players. If you remove those things, you simply remove the barrier of entry, which means loads more people can play and be at a competent level, but a lot of that competent level is just having a lot of heavy lifting done because the game has been oversimplified.
So it's weird. You come in, you're a new dev or a AAA dev, whatever, and you want to remove the friction, great. You remove the friction, the game is smooth, the game's easy to play, anyone could just click play and just be right in it, but they only play for a couple weeks or a month, and then they're like, well, there's nothing left to learn. Well, yeah, that's because you just removed all the friction. All the friction's gone, all the tooltips. Like, perfect example is this, yeah? On this screen, you see every single item and its value. You don't learn the value as a player. You instantly are told what it's worth. That is a developer coming in and saying, we're going to remove the friction and remove the complications of like the complexity of like seeing an item and being like, what is this? We're just going to tell you what it is. It's worth $1,000. That's it. Great if you're playing the game for the first time. Bad if you're playing the game for the 1,000th time. Because what makes extraction shooters good and interesting is giving that player the knowledge, the tools to like learn the game themselves, figure out what a pack of cigarettes is for.
Again, this perfectly relates to fighting games. When you don't give people a lot of things to do, a lot of barriers to overcome, and you just basically tell them what they need to do, or it's all there ready to go, like, yeah, just hit this button, this does your super for you, versus back in the day when it's like, wow, that is a really complex super, but I love this character, I really want to get good of them, let me start learning. Yeah, these people are going to jump on the game for a very, very short period of time, and then they're going to jump off, and the people that are going to be left are the same people, except it's going to be the people now that are complaining about everything. And so they'll say, oh, the FGC is always whining. The FGC is always whining. It's because the FGC hasn't changed. You've still got the people there that want to lock in and learn the games. You make these games for people that are going to play for 1 or 2 weeks. You think you're going to get the sales, which you don't end up getting unless you're like a juggernaut like Mortal Kombat, potentially. Even that took a hit. And then you're left with the more hardcore players who are complaining. And then it creates this illusion that all these people do is complain. But they wouldn't complain if you would stop removing the friction from the games. I don't want to play a game where I learn how to use the character in literally 2 minutes from one of my classic fighting games. Might be okay in one of the anime fighters I play, but not in the classic fighting games, where these games are already difficult. They're too difficult for newcomers to come in, and just because you've got lack of emotions, you're going to now overcome all these people. But they remove too much nuance to the point where the legacy players don't like what's going on. Now, you might argue that Invincible is a new IP, but it is working off of a very old framework, and it is trying to capture the very people that Marvel vs. Capcom 3 did. You can tell just by looking at the Invincible game, it is very much inspired by Marvel vs. Capcom 3. You're not going to be able to keep those players around if you simplify everything too much, because those players like going into the lab and diving into the systems and trying to figure things out and overcome barriers and figure out new ways to play those characters because of the barriers. Do you think the Tiger Knee Air Fireball was created overnight? It's not. It's because the execution barrier was there and somebody figured out how to take it to the next level. If you remove those things, you remove replay value. This is what people are annoyed and worried about.
Nobody thinks like that. Most people are like, just tell me what the pack of cigarettes are for, man. But what's fun about extraction shooters is when they don't tell you. So I don't know. This we just keep seeing this over and over and over again. The gameplay has to be really, 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 really good because it's removing all of that friction and making the game super accessible. The gameplay has to shine.
And I have no idea why this is a hard concept for people to grasp. This is happening across all genres. They say the FGC is complaining. No, open your eyes, clean out your ears. Everyone is complaining. Even my friends that play games very casually. Hell, even the people that play Mario Kart are telling me that they're not happy with how simplified the new Mario Kart is. Now, I can't speak to that in complete certainty. I know what I saw, I know what I think, and I know what I've heard from people that I trust the opinions of. Now, you might argue, well, Mario Kart is for kids, blah, blah, blah. Well, it always was for kids, but it did have that higher ceiling. It did have certain things that you could do in Mario Kart to separate you from the pack. I would know because I used to play it religiously. If they've removed those things, then you're going to remove a section of the player base and they're less likely to turn on your game. They're less likely to buy the DLC. Now, it might not matter in Mario Kart's case because Mario Kart is a juggernaut, but for fighting games that are very niche, that already struggle to keep people around, alienating the core audience and not listening to their wants and needs is going to cause you some serious problems. But that aside, the Invincible game can go down down whatever route it wants to go down, and if it falls on its face because of things like that, then so be it. I don't really like the idea of a game failing, and I certainly don't want to doom a game, but we do have to acknowledge the fact that people do not like this oversimplification of fighting games, and people that are saying that modern controls are no different from classic controls have their heads up their asses. You can do it and it's fine. I'm not going to hate on you for using those controls, but trying to make out like they're both the same thing is absolutely ridiculous. You think the developers designed a whole new system, demoed it, presented it to people, implemented it into the game because it does the exact same thing that the classic one did? Okay, that makes sense. Anyways, guys, let me know what you guys will think about this. I'll catch you all very soon. Take care and peace.